What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the What is Crypto podcast with your boy, Nye. In our last episode, we talked about mining. So hopefully, right now, at this point, we have a good grasp of what Bitcoin cryptocurrency mining is. But with everything, it comes with problems and issues. And that's what today's episode's about. It's about the problems of mining. One of the problems, it's very well known, that the proof of work system, what is proof of work? What is proof of stake? Well, we're going to go into that too. But proof of work is well known to waste lots of energy. And we're going to touch on that and many more problems with mining. But before we get into all that, did you know we had a Patreon? Go to patreon.com, search What is Crypto, and you can find us there. For $3, you can help support the show. For $5, you can get a lot of content that is like unedited podcasts, opinions, and, well, just extra content. And for other stages, please, you can look at it right on the Patreon page. You can become sponsors, place ads, run commercials, or do a lot of different things. So check out our Patreon page, patreon.com, and then search What is Crypto. We're right there. And if you have any questions, feel free to join us on Facebook in our community, What is Crypto. Send us an email on the contact page at whatiscrypto.com or tweet at us at our Twitter handle at whatiscrypto. You see that there's a pattern there. Anyway, without further BS from me, here's the episode, Problems with Mining with Mr. Tim Swanson and your boy Nye. We'll see you after the show.
Tim, thank you for coming on the show. Can you just give a quick introduction? What's your full name and title?
Tim Swanson, and I am head of market intelligence at Clearmatics.
Awesome. And how would you describe yourself?
I enjoy doing research on topics that may seem mundane today, but they typically pan out a couple years later.
Can you give us a clear definition of what is mining?
The way, at least we would say mining is in, say, the Bitcoin world, or your proof of work is, initially in 2008, 2009, mining was two things. It was the validation of transactions conforming to these quote-unquote consensus rules. And it's also the creation of, or the generation of hashes in the search to discover effectively the right number to create a block reward. And obviously, that's a very, very simplified way of describing what is Bitcoin mining today, but that actually has separated over the past 8 years or so since pools were created in 2010. 2010, 2011 was the era of the first pools. And what you ended up having is you had a segregation of duties. You had pools, which validated transactions, pulled them together into blocks. And then you have these machines that became dedicated, or rather, you outsourced work to these machines that were dedicated labor force, what we call miners typically. But that wasn't, the original idea in 2008, 2009.
And what's the difference between proof of work and proof of stake?
So there are several different proposals and, as you say, versions of proof of stake. In the simplest form, proof of stake, the idea is if you, instead of having a miner sit around generating hashes to find a specific number, and doing so expending capital to reach that, you have these machines. It could actually be significantly less, and in practice it is, machines that sit around with coins sitting on the network, on the machine that does the validation. And again, depending on which proof of stake model you're talking about, the more stake or the more coins they have on this machine or set of machines, as you effectively pool supposedly, the more vote you have on determining who will create the block or who will get the next block. Again, there's several different varieties, but the idea is you replace effectively semiconductor circuitry and energy, which is basically how proof of work is built around, to staking the actual coins from the network onto an actual machine.
And one of the big arguments right now with the proof of work, specifically with Bitcoin, is how much energy it takes to mine a Bitcoin. Two questions off of that. One, do you know how much energy it takes in relation to other processes that utilize energy? And two, what's your opinion on that whole situation?
Just to be clear, proof of work itself has been around since 1993 or so as a way of combating spam and email. The idea from Cynthia forget her last name, Walk, I believe, Cynthia Dorp. I have to look it up again. The idea was we have these mailing lists that are public, and because they're public, it's open to anyone, and anyone can obviously spam it without the ability to stop them. And so the idea here is, well, let's attach a little CAPTCHA, as we might use today, something that would require your CPU generating some cycles to make it a little expensive or a little costly to actually generate this spam. And so that was carried on. There have been various versions of it over time. But the way proof of work works in Bitcoin is, again, since we don't know who participants were, at least in 2009 when it was launched, to prevent a reorganization and rewriting of the history of the chain, at least some kind of economic resources needed to be expended. So saying whether it's expensive or not is obviously relative, but the way proof of work coins have historically expended resources is miners will effectively buy and use capital up to the point where the marginal cost equals the marginal value of that coin. So if you have $1,000 coin, rational miners will not spend more than $1,000 to basically seek that seigniorage. They will not burn more capital than that's worth. But at the same time, we could go into this, we could determine how much electricity is theoretically being used to achieve this. And so we look at it in two separate ways. The way I prefer to use it, you take a network hash rate, which is publicly known. So for example, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, I actually wrote a post about this a couple days ago. And then you divide it by the most commonly used hardware that you could buy. So for example, with Bitcoin, you can look at the ASIC hardware from Bitmain or other vendors, and you just take the most powerful one or the most efficient one, and you divide that and to get a number, or you take the least efficient one and you divide that. Obviously, that changes over time as new generations of hardware come out. But I just, again, literally just did this, and you guys could double check the math. If you look at the network hash rate on Bitcoin today, and you divide that by, say, the most efficient Bitmain hardware, which is the S17E, which comes out like right now, you effectively need well over 1.5 million of these machines to generate that equivalent hash rate. And that's, I believe, if I recall, it's around 40 billion kilowatt hours per year to do. That's assuming you have the most efficient machines. Whereas if you took something from the summer, like Bitmain released, it was the S9 SE, generates about 16 terahashes a second. If you divide the entire network by how many devices you need for that, you need about just over 6.2 million of those machines going to create the same amount of hash rate. And together, all those little machines would consume about 70 billion kilowatt hours. So to give you an idea how much energy that would be, on the most efficient side, that's roughly the equivalent of energy that is used in a country like Romania in a given year. And then if you use those S9 SEs, it's about equivalent of Austria. And that's actually, those are the bounds. So lower bound would be the most efficient, upper bound would be the least efficient. That's actually probably closer to the upper bound, not because I'm a mean, horrible person, but because as electricity is moved through the grid and up through the wall, you actually see a loss, maybe 10% or more. So again, when you buy this hardware, like Bitmain, they specifically say at the wall, the power draw is, and then they'll say like, oh, plus 10% or something like that. So I say that all because even if I repeatedly point out that this is probably an environmental disaster, and obviously I probably did not win any friends on your show, but if we look at other ways of preventing Sybil attacks, remember, we're concerned on these public networks of the fact that anyone can participate. Well, how do you prevent people from spamming the network? In Bitcoin, the way this is done is to require economic resources, scarce economic resources to be used. And so they do this through this proof of work method. So to compare it, part of your question was, how would you compare it with others? Well, the other ways is to compare it with other ways to prevent Sybil attacks on a public network. And the alternative that's being investigated by different projects and organizations and companies is proof of stake. Now, I'm not going to go on your show and say, proof of stake from XYZ company or organization or chain is the right way to do it. But it appears that through the research that's been done and the chains that are alive, that it could be possibly done. And you don't necessarily need to consume the energy footprint of a European country to do so. So I'll pause there.
This question, how do you use crypto in your daily life, is sponsored by BMag. BMag.io. BMag, they write stories that inform, influence, and inspire the global blockchain cryptocurrency community.
I tend to use cryptocurrencies specifically for making payments to employees and things like that. I also get paid in cryptocurrency, whether it be Bitcoin, Ethereum, or a stable coin. I personally like to use stable coins in order to pay employees or pay contractors because it's easy, it's simple to use, it's something that I can easily transact with to anyone, anywhere in the world without having to worry about high fees or high transaction times or the fluctuation of the value or pricing within a period of time of me sending it and the receiver receiving it.
And now, back to Michael and his guest. Enjoy the rest of the show.
This is a big conversation, man, and I'm really, really interested in what you have to say about it because I think that what you've shared so far just shows the extensive time and energy and focus you put into learning this and really diving deep. And I think the major question that you've already touched on a little bit, but I want to get some clarification and dive deeper into is, do you feel that this is a waste of resources, this whole proof of work specifically with Bitcoin?
So the short answer is yes, but I'm saying that from a socially useful perspective. I know people will say, oh, Tim, Christmas lights waste electricity. Oh, Tim, Fortnite wastes electricity. I mean, we could make arguments all day about things and lists of things that waste electricity and which ones are the worst and stuff like that. But we're talking about a payments network and the economic activity that takes place on a payments network. There is no other payments network on the planet that consumes an entire energy footprint of a European country. Even European countries don't require the energy footprint of their country to run their payments networks. There's hundreds, there's actually thousands of payment networks on top of payment networks, if you will. Like again, each developed country has something called an RTGS. It doesn't take 1.5 million computers to run the Federal Reserve's RTGS or the Bank of England's RTGS. So when we're comparing it, we need to compare it to two things. Number one, things that are public networks that require civil protection. So again, that would be something like a proof of stake network. Or if we're looking at payments in general, how much energy does it take compared to other payment networks? Now, the typical counter argument is, oh, Tim, but you can't use, say, Fedwire for something, same use cases as Bitcoin because they could reverse it or shut you down or gatekeeper. And you're absolutely right. Like the use cases for traditional payments is very different. In fact, that's probably what inspired someone like Satoshi or the group behind Satoshi to create Bitcoin. Is they may have been. There's lots of theories about the motivation, but they could have been very interested in doing something like online gambling. And during the mid 2000s, there was a bunch of online gambling websites that were shut down and cracked down, and you had the DOJ and other government agencies put out warrants for people's arrests that are operating these things. Liberty Reserve is a good example of that. So again, not to detract too much, I'm just trying to say that when we say compare to what, and we can't say, of course, Bitcoin is less of a waste than, say, people playing Fortnite all day. Fortnite isn't designed to, number one, consume all the resources of the GPU. In fact, you only have certain peak times of the GPU being used. But more to the point, Fortnite's not an anti-Sybil mechanism. It's not designed to sit there and prevent people having access to certain payment functions. So we really need to put things in perspective and compare things in an apples-to-apples way.
I think the question that I'm really, really curious about here is anybody that's into Bitcoin can understand and see the excessive amount of energy that it uses. It's arguable. Some people believe it's too excessive. Some people believe it's not. When you say that it is a waste of resources, like to what degree is it a waste of resources? Are we talking about, it's a little wasteful, or are we talking about potentially destruction of the planet, that severe level of wasteful?
So yeah, I wrote two articles, one last year, one just a few days ago. They have a bunch of links and papers in which actual full-time researchers dedicated to this kind of topic, environmental studies, have gone in and tried to gauge what kind of impact it is. And I believe last year there was at least one report that said all the gains from renewable energy have been offset by miners trying to find the cheapest sources of electricity, and often case, especially when it's not summertime. So again, a lot of the Bitcoin promoters will say, oh, 70% of the Bitcoin network is run off of renewables. Well, not really. There's a certain time frame during the year when you have water melting off of the mountains near Sichuan that generate some electricity for 3 to 4 months that are really cheap. But then miners go to where it's even cheaper or just as cheap, and they typically go to places with like coal power plants or natural gas power. So again, I'm not sitting here on your show saying it's going to lead to the end of the world, but when we look at the economic activity that takes place, and we can measure that, Chainalysis is a company that does data analytics, and they're able to point and look at all the different intermediaries, the different coin exchanges and wallets and darknet markets and so forth, and payment processors. And they continually show that in any given day or any given month, over 90% of the activity that takes place on, say, the Bitcoin blockchain or other types of major chains like that are basically movement from one coin exchange to another. So you basically are just moving money from one intermediary to another, and you really don't need proof of work in that case. And again, we could argue about why not, but the short answer on my part is, since you know who the participants are, or at least the exchanges know the participants, you don't have a Sybil issue. You're basically working on a permission network because both ends are gated, or at least in theory they're gated through KYC, AML stuff. But just to give you some perspective, in 2016, the Federal Reserve published a paper talking about distributed ledgers and things like that. And I think it was like on page 3, they put down an interesting fact that I have right in front of me. It says, in aggregate, the U.S. Payment clearing settlement systems process approximately 600 million transactions per day, valued at $12.6 trillion. So I'm not saying that Bitcoin is going to fail, but it doesn't do anything to that magnitude, and yet it doesn't take Austrian or Romanian-sized energy footprint to power the U.S. payment clearing settlement systems, even though there's numerous of them, and they obviously are run by different types of agencies, for-profit and government. The magnitude differential between the utility that's being moved around on proof-of-work network versus a traditional network is several orders of magnitude. And so that's where the argument from someone like myself would be, look at Litecoin. Litecoin has basically one developer, Charlie Lee, who merges Bitcoin core updates into Litecoin every week or every month. There's very few others that help out. He's talked about this publicly. And so you have a network that consumes the energy footprint of a small country. I could give you the name of it. It is today, it's basically Cambodia or Moldova. And it doesn't, there's no economic activity. So we basically have machines draining that are just generating hashes for a network that almost no one uses. And the only reason people mine on it is because they could sell it on an exchange, from one exchange to another, in which it's gated. So you have this really weird permission on permissionless kind of situation going on. I've written about this a couple of years ago, in which you have the endpoints permissioned, the network participants, these miners, as it were, are quote unquote permissionless, although there's only like 20, 25 in a given month. There's not a whole lot of dynamism there. But you have all the costs of permissionlessness, as it were, through paying people through block rewards, which is hundreds or thousands of dollars a day, depending on the network, or hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, depending on the network. Again. But then you end up gating the endpoints. So it's this weird hydra. I would argue that something like Litecoin, it's not producing anything socially useful, aside from a way from moving your Bitcoin earnings into Litecoin and back, so that way you could avoid taxes or something like that.
Very interesting perspective. I like that. So moving on out of the discussion of mining, I want to talk a little bit about root chain maximalism. What is root chain maximalism?
Yeah, it's great. And it's a nice little tangent to what we were just talking about there. So root chain maximalism we've seen for at least 5 years since the sidechains white paper came out from Blockstream. The idea here it was like October 2014, actually, exactly 5 years ago, in which they make the case saying, hey, we could design a method, and they provide 2 methods, one in the main paper and then one in the appendix, I believe, in which you can peg 2-way pegged sidechains back to Bitcoin network. There was a lot of PR around it. And we see the same thing with Ethereum and other networks with sidechains. I think was this at DevCon last week, and there was a number of proposals to do that. And so the way to kind of describe some of the motivation, I'm not saying everyone involved in that process is a quote unquote root chain maximalist, but by trying to tie things back into simply one network, you centralize, number one, you centralize risk and create this new systemic entity in case, if Bitcoin blows up or Ethereum blows up. Again, I'm not saying they will, but if there's ever some unintended fork or emergency fork or some kind of inflation bug, and we've seen that happen in many different proof of work networks, that who is liable, how does accountability take place, how does recourse take place? We could argue about that. I'm not a lawyer, so maybe bring on a lawyer at some point to talk about this, like Stephen Paley or something. Root chain maximalism is just the idea that everything is going to be tied back from these side chains onto a main chain of some kind. And it really just adds complexity and a larger attack surface. So that's the short answer, the short, long answer to your question.
And where do you find yourself on this specific topic?
I don't want to, I've already poured rain on people's parade so far on this call, so why should I stop now? So instead of being so focused on the token itself, say Ether or Bitcoin, why can't we look at P2P value transfer in quote unquote decentralized internet in the first place? So I hate saying Web3 because Web3 is such a nebulous term, but the goals of the last 5 years from the Ethereum crowd specifically is, hey, how can we create infrastructure that's useful, socially useful, but doesn't end up turning into what we have today, where you have these effectively internet monopolies that can rule over who can say what, when. And again, I'm not going to dive into the policy issues here, but if there's a way you could build things, provide value, and you could get a community around that, ecosystem around that, why does there need to be this specific little coin or token to rally people rather than the tech? So I know there's all sorts of things around quote unquote layer 2, and that's obviously a nebulous term, but there's standards around some of those now with, say, state channels. You go to statechannels.org, 8-10 different companies trying to do that with Ethereum. I'm not trying to say that without the main net, you would still have the enthusiasm and 4,000 developers showing up at a conference in Osaka like they did. But I'm more interested in technology rather than number go up or down.
In the beginning of our conversation here, man, you discussed a little bit, it wasn't super deep, and I want to open it up a little bit more about the initial use case of Bitcoin and kind of how we've shifted away from what Satoshi Nakamoto wrote about in the white paper and what the original kind of purposes of that was. Can you share a little bit more on your perspective and an opinion on that?
So I don't think I'm ever going to convince the hardcore vocal maximalists of this at this stage. They're pretty entrenched. But there's a guy named Sam Pat. He wrote a really good article during the early summer, in which he basically went through, I believe it was all of his forum posts, or her, them, whatever she is, and basically categorized, these comments are related to payments, and this is related to quote unquote store value. I don't want to say how long I've been involved. I really don't think that matters. But if we go through those posts, irrespective of what date you became interested in Bitcoin, the title of the white paper is about payments. So for me, I think that the quote unquote store value or digital gold is a complete diversion. I don't think any of these networks can fundamentally provide something like quote unquote hard money, because you could always fork them. And in fact, the whole idea of a proof of work network is anyone can come in, anyone can build a block on top of a tree that they want, or a chain, as it were. And it's the longest chain, supposedly the one that's supposed to be legitimate. That's quote unquote Nakamoto consensus. But why can't you create your own chain if you don't like it? Well, you don't have to worry about somebody gating you, because that's what the whole gatekeeper free method, or that's the reason the architecture exists the way it does. So I can't say the people who are fervent against forks, there's a whole group that are anti-hard forks. I don't think I could convince them not to have that view, but I will say that if you don't want to have a hard fork, then you should be interested in permission networks, because by contractually you're not allowed to have forks, or if you do, there's a court that could come in and say this is the actual ledger, or this is when the mutation took place, and this is the ledger that's going to be deemed legitimate. Quote unquote permissionless ledgers are supposed to, by design, at least the proof of work networks, supposed to be forkable. So if they're fighting against this tidal wave, and I think it's just kind of silly, rather than focusing on building P2P systems that don't involve intermediaries, in this case maybe payments, they've kind of, in my view, got very diverted into this kind of like cult of number go up.
So is the store of value story, in your opinion, kind of bullshit and maybe an avoidance tactic to looking at the actual problems that Bitcoin has in terms of its original purpose with the network, the way it's supposed to be peer-to-peer cash system?
Well, the majority of the people who have been pushing it are guys who bought it in 2011, 2012, 2013. So they got in early, so they're rich, and so for them, they kind of lucked into money. But there's hundreds of dead coins. Deadcoins.com has a list of dead cryptocurrencies and ICOs and other types of tokens. So these networks are not sustainable just because we keep on saying they're sustainable. Blockchains require people to run. They require money to run. In the case of these proof of work networks specifically, you need capital. You need miners, capable of accruing and generating the hash rate to create these blocks. And there's only so many networks that can be supported at this scale in terms of value that's being created every 10 minutes or whatever the seigniorage, the block reward time. It's 2.5 minutes in Litecoin. The way these store of value arguments effectively boil down to is, hash rate is like the equivalent of DRM. You could prevent copying and things like that. But that's not true. Like, there's the only way you could prevent forking at this stage is by getting all the people on Twitter to yell and scream and brigade threads. It's not about technical arguments, and we saw that, I think, very vividly with the Bitcoin Cash segment 2x stuff. And again, that's a whole other episode, and probably lost another half of your listeners by saying that it didn't boil down to a technical argument; it boiled down to personalities.
Man, I agree there. And I think it's important to have these discussions. And I think the last question that I want to lead into here is, with this whole discussion of SOV, store of value, is kind of bullshit, and that we haven't really taken the necessary actions in order to complete the peer-to-peer cash system that was designed and the way that it was supposed to be. Like, the really big question that I have, and I think it's kind of the pinnacle of our discussion here, with all of that we've discussed here, has Bitcoin failed?
Well, it just depends on what metrics, and if people still use it to do things you couldn't do with traditional payments. So if people keep on doing that, then by that measure, it hasn't failed. And we saw that today or the day before, when you had, for example, the largest, people are going to hate me for saying this, but the largest child porn ring got shut down, and they were using Bitcoin to fund that. And that's something you couldn't do with traditional payments, for good reason. That's horrible. I would hate to have my child being exploited like that. But as long as you have the ability to pay for things that would get you deplatformed or kicked off of one of the payment systems, then something like Bitcoin will continue to be a magnet for those typically illicit activities. So if you say, has it failed? I mean, it's failed to create gravity around illicit activity. Why would you pay for your bills? Like Ohio State, or the state of Ohio allowed Bitcoin to be used as payment for businesses at the beginning of the year, and then now they just said there's only 10 businesses the whole year that have done it, and we're shutting that down. And they were just using BitPay; they weren't even holding it in custody. So, yeah, I would not say it's failed. It's certainly only attracting who I think was intended for activities like online gambling that you'd get shut down for in 2008.
Is it too late to shift that? Is it too late to make a change, or do you think that this is maybe step one of this whole experiment, and that something else may have the potential to step in and do it better than Bitcoin's done?
On the anarchic side, I mean, you've had the Bitcoin Cash guys try to use big blocks, or bigger blocks, just to say, like, 32 meg blocks now, and still nobody uses it. So I don't think, even from a technical level, like at this stage, that the mass consumers really care. They just want something that works. They have insurance. They have fraud protection. Those aren't things that, by design, Bitcoin Satoshi wasn't trying to solve, some of these problems that consumers may have. There's no loyalty program. There's no 3% cashback rewards for a reason. So, there's cost to that. Sure, you can't, quote unquote, reverse transactions unless obviously you accumulate enough hash rate. But that only solves problems for certain segments of the population, like at-risk merchants who do, for example, marijuana or something like that. So you could try. I'm not saying you won't get some set of customers, but why would you, as a normal customer, want to go through the friction of having to custody your own coins and potentially forget those, and then have to deal with daily price volatility or bad actors coming and trying to steal your coins? Oh, by the way, one last thing, please, on social media, guys, don't tell people you have coins. Like, you just set yourself to be a target. I don't understand why people do that. But anyways, that's obviously beside the point. But it does tie in with the whole OPSEC issue of trying to onboard quote unquote mainstream people.
Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. You definitely gave me a whole other perspective to kind of look at, and I appreciate it, man.
Pleasure to be here, and happy to help out.
I love this topic because my 2 cents is, who cares how much energy you're using? Who cares? We're always going to need more energy. We're always going to need more energy for the population, for technology, for the expansion of the human race. If we're flying to Mars, we're flying to the moon. If we're mining oil fields or collecting solar energy, we're always going to need more. There's going to be more cell phones to charge, more cars to charge, more laptops, bigger screens, bigger houses, more lights, bigger cities, taller buildings, We want our air conditioning colder. We want our heat warmer. And more people are going to have heat, and more people are going to have air conditioning. And that's a good thing. So we're always going to need to find ways to generate more energy. So when somebody says, in my opinion, hey, it uses too much energy, I say, hey, why aren't we making more clean, renewable, efficient energy off that big ball of energy 93 million miles away from us? The sun. So it's interesting how this narrative plays out. But the other problems that arise from proof of work are also interesting. But since I had my rant, and well, since I'm doing the outro of the show, your DYOR today is to look up different ways to produce energy. And that could be solar panels. That can be, I don't know. That's not my job to do DYOR. That's yours. I hope you look into this, because I think with a little bit of searching, you might be surprised what is available in your neighborhood. Thermal, solar, hydroelectric. Where is your power coming from? If you have a house, could you get your power from a different place? Do you have to be hooked up to the city's power grid that could be using nuclear or coal? Or could you dig and get thermal? Could you walk out 500 feet, maybe up to a half a kilometer to your backyard and find a river that can get you hydro? Could you put some solar panels on your roof, a couple batteries in your basement, and collect the sun's energy? And how can you also distribute that back to the power grid or to your neighbors? So in this week's DYOR, let's talk about power. Let's talk about how you get it, and if there's any other options within your neighborhood for yourself that you can use renewable, clean energy to do whatever your heart desires. Thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll see you in future episodes of What is Crypto with your boy Nye.